Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited about this episode. Before I introduce you to our guest, here's a quote specifically to this episode. Every man has a wild beast within him. Frederick the Great. Today, I have another great on the show, a regular on the Culture Matters podcast. Your message received, mentor, coach, leader, someone who actually takes action, lives the advice of others, gives advice, is incongruent with their thoughts and their actions. As Goethe once said, something to the effect of thinking for oneself is hard, but to live in accordance with one's thinking is hardest. This man right here is the man. He's great. I'm going to introduce his name in a couple more minutes after I continue this introduction. We always have fun when he's coming on the podcast. He's
Always
going to be an author someday when I nudge him to get that book out. And today we're going to record episode 1786. Just kidding. Of the Culture Matters podcast. John Duffin, thanks for
coming. It is
I love
so nice to be back, Bob. Great to see you. The wild beast part I'm liking.
Man, I discovered that yesterday. I loved it.
I saw that, by the way. It's all a part of like following you so closely. I saw that post. I saw that you had that in terms of, oh my, that was almost like an overnight 1A, 2A. I noticed the time. I'm like, okay, this guy keeps moving 24/7. So I love it.
I'd like to know your thoughts on the introduction. I've been getting a lot of feedback from people with the introduction. What do you think it is about giving compliments or giving not even comments, like acknowledging people's strengths? What do you think that does for people, and why do you think it's important to do that? Or is it, or do you have a different view of it? Because I'm right in the question, I'm assuming that there's something constructive there. But yeah, I know you're a very thoughtful person. You think about leadership. You think you train leaders. You help teams, manage teams. But like, and people that are listening may or may not acknowledge their people or people in their life. So I'm curious what your philosophy is on this.
Yeah, and I think that thank you. First off, it's great to be back here. And then the other like part, the acknowledge part to me is what's so critical. If we're making introductions like, oh, and Jay's such a nice guy and so fun and love him, and they have nothing but air. Well, then then it's almost like a daytime television, the old school daytime television talk shows. And oh, you're going to love him. One of my favorite people, had him for dinner last night. But when you're acknowledging, you use the word strengths. When you're acknowledging strengths, now I'm flattered, first off. But I mean, the fact is that it's also, to me, when you're speaking to people, if the keywords are on point and they are, I aspire to those. I'm not going to say, yeah, I'm this and I'm that. But I mean, you're aspiring to that. And whether it's in the doing or the learning for a fifth time, the fact is you're aspiring to that. You were at least giving someone a heads up. Hey, this is what this person does. So maybe you hear a relevant keyword and you're like, oh, I'll focus. So anyway, I'm flattered. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm always curious, like, how can I do a better job with the introductions? And you just rose a thought in my mind, like, what does the person do? How do I understand that they do it? Who are they to me? I'm trying to think, like, what are the questions I have to ask myself so I could be a better host, honestly.
I go through the same thing all the time. So I'll give you an example. I just did some interviews. I did a series of interviews, and it was like for a project that's mattering to me. No pun intended with the matters, but it matters a great deal. It's not concluded yet. But what the thing that was in my mind was this. I banged out, I guess it was 10 interviews, like boom, 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 boom. Literally all we did is move my chair and move the other person's, and the next person sat down and we went. So intro that you asked me specifically, it's like you keep it on point. The one thing I think that's really important, in terms of, especially like Jay, you're firing off, and I love the way that your podcast is exploding in the frequency as well as with the actual content. And so because you've got the frequency, it's harder to do. But the one thing is you make it relevant. You don't just give a standard intro. You said something in the very beginning, which I liked, and it's something that I'll take with me too, which is I found this quote specifically for today's episode. Even that, to me, brings it more on point. When I was doing those series of interviews, the two things that I had in my mind was I wanted to just have a conversation. There were people that have been interviewed a lot. And so they're accustomed to just sitting down to, oh, well, tell me a little bit about, and they just have to go into autopilot. My two missions were with those interviews. They were short. Number one, that they would just talk to me like people, not like robots. I just wanted them to sound human when they're so accustomed to these frozen interviews. Two, that it was relevant to them specifically. So if I brought up one thing that was specifically relevant, a quote they made recently, a question maybe no one has asked them before, that did something relevant to them rather than tell me about today's game. You know what I mean? That has no bearing on anything. And so that's like, as you're doing it, as I keep doing it, it's always at least try to customize it to the person that's showing up, because it's almost like a dog whistle. They hear something like, ooh, ooh, they're talking to me. And I found that it worked really well in terms of I didn't ask the same questions, although I wanted the same content from the 10 people. I didn't ask the same questions. I didn't do that with the intro, and everyone was like something a little bit personal about them. They changed their whole demeanor.
For the listeners that have, they just started their show, meaning
Right.
they've asked 10 people, they haven't interviewed any of them yet. They've all committed.
Yeah.
They have a microphone. Maybe they even spent $1,000 on a setup.
Big fancy chair.
Yeah, the fancy chair.
Right.
How long did it take you to come into your own?
Oh, all right. So pro tip, folks, for your first episodes, hit record. Nothing like recording an entire podcast episode and realizing you didn't hit the record button. And so, you'd think I'm kidding. I'm not. Hit record would be the first thing to remember. You can always edit. Secondly, and this was the thing, do some homework. A dear friend of mine who also happens to be a relative works in the broadcast digital industry, and I steal from her, and her first name is Sheila, and one of my favorite people, and she's a great reporter. And one of the things they asked, that her quote was, try to find something that no one has asked them before. And sometimes that's easy. If you're interviewing guests that haven't been on a lot of podcasts, well, that's easy. Make it as personal as you can without being cloying. Find something that impacts them more than what impacts you. You want to get to the bottom. You starting a podcast. You want to make a brand, make a name, enhance your reputation, build something that's cohesive. Personalize it at least a little bit. Try to find something that haven't been asked before. If you've got a guest that's been on a million podcasts, that's harder to do. At least don't repeat the same standard blueprint questions.
Do you find that people that you go on shows have like the same questions?
Yes.
No, really?
Yes. I won't out them or name them. Yes. I think that's the thing, that there's two things. Number one, like I said, obviously do your homework. That's really what it comes down to. Do some homework on the guest. Make them feel welcomed in a way that's a little bit different than guests.
I just realized the irony of I got kicked out of school for not doing my homework, and I do so much homework.
And now you're the consummate to your homework. Hey, brother.
What?
I went to Catholic school, and the last last bad Catholic school experience, one of the reasons I have such a hate on for Catholic schools, had to do with not doing my homework. So it brings up a lot. So I do my homework. I literally do my homework. You know what I mean? Invest the time, do your homework. You'll learn something. So when you're talking to people, do a little bit of prep. Make it an experience that somebody wants to show up to.
What do you think is the reason that there's these canned questions that arise? Or the reasons?
Yeah.
What is it? Is it
you're focusing more? Here's what I believe, which is what to me is the essence of communications. You're focusing more on yourself and your objective rather than their objective, and there has to be some mutual benefit. And whether you are selling and you're rattling off 25 PowerPoint slides as to why this is such a wonderful concept and you need to give me this funding because it's such a brilliant idea, and then you go back to your PowerPoint slides. Here's to me what I'm learning as I continue to guest and interview on podcasts. If you're going to differentiate yourself, which is this, look, the homework is turning personal to me into pointed business conversations. That's the magic. I think the disconnect with a lot of people, and it happened in my sales career, I watched it a million times. You had a million, participated in, delivered, and observed a ton of presentations. How can you get better? You weave the personal into business. So rather than how's the kids, how's the house, how's so-and-so, now let me get to my, and you have a personal conversation. And then you go to a canned business conversation. Now let me go to my PowerPoint slides. Podcast hosts, same deal. Don't confuse or make them so polar separate.
I see.
Hey, Jay, hope you're well. Hope Jen is well. Hope everything's great. How was the party last Saturday? Stop. And then you go to your canned podcast questions. The magic is weaving them in together so that people actually will stay with you for the conversation, that it actually matters to them a little bit. And so the example is literally do your homework and then try to put it into the business concept.
I struggle with being a guest on podcasts.
Why so?
How can I show up better?
How so?
Well, first of all, I'm worried.
You don't mind, and I didn't sing. I didn't get it. You know,
you're a true coach asking, right?
Thank you.
First of all, I'm worried. I'm skeptical that it'll even be released.
That's happened to me.
I also feel alienated when I ramble about, thoughts catch me and then they take me places. And I just got frustrated talking to myself.
Okay.
And I'm not sure I'm followed in my thought. And I have had bad experiences going on them. So what can I do? I'm trying to think, what can I do better? How can I do a better job?
Yeah. And those are great questions.
Responsibility for this. And I think it's valuable to go on the shows.
Yep. Oh, I absolutely think it's valuable for you, not for anybody, and for you specifically. Here's the only thing. Look, you have less. Here's the part that if you are guesting on a podcast, my gosh, I literally just did a series. It was a pod talk, and it was talking about guesting. Have very specific things that you'd like to talk about. I don't mean scripts, bullet points. I'd like to cover this thing. Make it clear to the host because they have some responsibility rather than, and so the old business mantra that I learned and have practiced and preached in a sales and executive capacity is keep bringing it back to the business. You can substitute business for the matter at hand. You're allowed to go off topic. In fact, a natural conversation often does. But there's a mutual agreement. I'll give you an example. Like I'm guesting on a podcast, another one this afternoon, so I'm flattered that I get to do a couple today, right? And so anytime you and I talk, there's some sort of a sense of where we're going to go. And even if there isn't, we've built in enough trust that we know we're going to bring it back to the business, bring it back to the episode, because I know how you roll and you know how I roll. That's time, experience, and practice. For me, you're guesting on a podcast and you don't know. Do yourself a solid. Get a couple of bullet points. Hey, I'd love to be able to go over this today. Where are you headed? And so you want to have some sort of a dialogue, and that could be an email, bullet points, text, conversation. Hey, I'd like to head here. Where do you want to take me? Why? When you're in a natural conversation and you go off point, the biggest fear that I would have is, I don't know where I am. Now I'm out over here. Well, if you have a sense of, today we said we're going to do this and this and this, you know where to go back to. They're almost like buoys, like you've got these, like maybe, hey, 2 or 3 things. I'd love to be able to focus on this today. Are you cool with that? Yeah, but whatever you two have mutually agreed to, you can always swim to the buoy. Go back to one of the points. If you feel like you've gone off and the host is not bringing you back, you can bring yourself back.
What are
Sometimes that
some
helps me.
ways that you've managed to increase the likelihood of getting on podcasts, or how have you been gotten spots?
Yeah. Okay. And it's been more recently, and I'm very, very grateful that I've been guesting more. A couple of ways I will credit an organization called Podmatch that I subscribe to, right? And one of the things, and as a result, they have asked me, they have featured me in regards to doing certain things, but I've gone on, and it sounds like a dating service, and
I was
maybe
about
it
to
kind
say,
of
is that
is.
the hinge of podcast?
Maybe not quite the grinder,
That's
but I was
funny.
gonna
Oh,
say
that's good.
but maybe, but it is. And so that's part, and I've, as a result, have been invited to certain things and opportunities and presented for them. But then also, it matters. Oh God, I keep using it. It matters. The culture matters, and this matters. It
I've stolen
matters
it.
to
Yep.
me not to waste people's time. It just does. It's like, so if I'm coming on with you, like we have, like I said, we have a strong enough relationship that we're not going to let each other down. But the fact of the matter is, too, I'm not just going to come on and wing it with you. I knew where I wanted to go today, and then we had a conversation, and now we're in, and the quote helps me. I don't like to waste people's time. One of the things I think about is this: from a business sense, podcast sense, the cliche, the expression, you always get a second, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. I think there's more truth to that than fantasy. I believe now, the way that people's minds are and the limited amount of time that you get, you really should be able to get your point across the first time. I've lost opportunities because I felt like, oh, I'll just call them back, and or I'll just, and then get them. They're off living their lives. So whether it is hosting a podcast, guesting on a podcast, asking for funding, creating, like I said, I'm creating this project currently that I'll talk more about when it's concluded. But when it is, people have a limited amount of time, don't waste it. Do your homework, get to the point, and when you are prepared, it is way easier to go off topic. Because you can always go back to one of those things. Make sure you don't forget to do boom, boom, boom. And to me today, specifically in terms of talking with you, it was bring it back to the business and don't waste people's time. That's literally my mantra for today.
What's your preparation process?
I literally, it's sometimes it's as simple as Googling. I'm amazed still how it's like, I'm like blown away with the ease of Google. And I'm not saying, hey folks, do you know about Google? What I mean is, you can answer so many questions of your own in seconds. books they've written, books they've read, books they've quoted, quotes of Jay Doran, X month, X day, social media, for God's sake. It's like, my mom's is approaching 95 years old, and she's every day playing her, you know what I mean? Go to social media, for God's sake. Make it easy on yourself. Or at least start there. Start there. Find them. What have they said lately? You know what kills me? It's weird, like a vain thing, but what kills me when I'm either hosting, guesting, speaking in a business conversation. Oh God, I get asked that question all the time. When somebody says that, it literally, that throws me, because to me, it's a mark of I didn't do enough prep. Because that's exactly what I don't want you saying to me. I don't want you saying, oh yeah, I get asked that. Oh my God, I get asked that all the time. Then I feel like I fell short. What I want to hear is, oh God, that's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. Oh, that's funny that I never get to talk about that. Or the way that someone lights up when you hit a note that works for them. And it just happened to me, and I loved it, where it was like in one of those series of interviews, I brought up the guy's dad. Something as basic as his dad, the whole conversation shifted, because he's talking about his dad, and he's then talking about me and my brother, and blah, blah, blah. It's amazing what you can uncover in a conversation. And that's the operative word for me. What can you uncover that's a little different than what everyone else is uncovering? You, in the beginning, bringing it back to the business, the cliche, but it's true. In the very beginning, you were saying, as a podcast host, I'd like to be able to, in intros, I'd like to be able to do. To me, it's a joy when I see someone speak slightly differently, that doesn't sound so scripted or businessy. And that was one, it just happened. And the guy who gets interviewed, I don't know, 10 times a week, all of a sudden just lights up and it's like, oh yeah, me and my brother, and we were little, and my dad, blah, blah, blah. There's a joy to me to that, because you found something that really matters, because you only have to wait maybe a minute, and then they're telling you something that probably most people haven't been told.
What was your first? Or go ahead.
No, you finish, please. I'm sorry. Finish the thought.
What was your first job?
Well, my first job was a paper boy at 13, to be literally exact. Rolling around with a shopping cart in Philadelphia.
Was that safe?
At the time, yeah, quite, because it was a long time ago. So was it safe? Well, picture this: some 12, 13-year-old with wire cutters, who has no technical skills. Not that safe, but it was done. The first job, I'll say, that was relevant to this conversation. I'm slightly older than 13 at this point, and it was at a radio station in Atlantic City, New Jersey, WFPG radio, and it was 30 some odd years ago, and I can still remember no one wanted to hire me in Philadelphia. I didn't have this and I didn't have that, and you need to do this and I didn't do that, and whatever. So a very dear friend of mine put me in this position, and I commuted, or I was staying in hotels during the week, some old, like the casinos or whatever. And that's when I learned. It's like, you got to be a little bit different, and it's easier than you think. Different has to be relevant. Different doesn't have to be pure entertainment, but when you always are bringing it back to the matter at hand, I learned people like that.
What do you think it was in you at that time that this friend saw something?
Without sounding overly vain, I believe it's my ability to connect with people, and connect in a way that's relevant, that helps people. It's not just being somebody's buddy. That's great, by the way. It's great, and I'm always grateful for the friends that I have, and it means a lot to me. But it's in a way that, again, I wasn't going to go in and waste your time. And that was something I learned. God, that's cool. By the way, great question. No one asked me. Thank you.
I'm learning from the master right
I'm
now.
gonna say that
Take
just
action.
makes me happy. So I can just picture, right? I'm driving to Atlantic City. So my commute would be like at 6 a.m. and I'd be driving down the Atlantic City Expressway by myself because no one's on the expressway at 6 a.m. other than me. And so it was the sense of there was the joy. Oh my God, I had no experience. I had no nothing, but there was like a joy of going in when you got it right, and I banged my head a lot, but I can remember a few times when I got it right early on, and I just remember the feeling.
What was the first biggest lesson?
Uh, God. The easiest answer, a person came to my head. That's why it took me a while to answer. A person came, and I'm not going to bring that person up other than the sense that trust yourself would be the direct answer. What exactly I mean was it was a mentor that was literally telling me in code, don't work so hard. I
Really?
remember, yeah. You don't have to come back to the office after the calls, and I was always coming back because I wanted to get ready. I wanted to, do the due diligence, find new people to speak with, all that sort of thing. And it was easier at that time. It was a little less of a fluid, mobile life as we've got now, where you can do that anywhere. We were a little more anchored 30 some odd years ago to the computer. You know what I mean? So it was like I would go back and this mentor who was like the secondary boss was like, you don't have to come back. No, don't even worry about it. And I remember thinking, but I have to come back because I'm not set up yet for success. And I got to prove myself and I can't be roadblocked. So I just came back anyway. And so I came back and I kept coming back. And I stayed later and it was colossal pain. I think I put on about 40 pounds because I was eating on the Garden State Parkway on the way home at 8 o'clock and getting home at 9 p.m. and then back on the road at 6 and it was like, and eating garbage on the Parkway. But I knew I needed to make an impression because I didn't have another direction to go. So I was going to make it.
Had you not been that way to not listen to that,
Right.
or where do you think you'd be today?
Oh, some were just okay. Just okay. Some were just okay. Because here's the best, if you're working with a coach or mentor, it's so to me important to remind them. Like, I don't want to hear how life for you is, in this case, in 2024. Because you're not doing the same things that you were doing to make your mark. So I want to hear future, but I also want to remind people that it's like my path in it currently is a much different path than I was taking to prove myself. I have certain tendencies that I still utilize, but I think it's really important to remind people what it was like in the beginning. And for me, it was like, you're not, I have to keep working. I have no control. I have no choice. You don't know what my current income is or my situation, and I have to go build. And so I did. And I listened to people. I'm not saying don't listen, but I wouldn't listen to people say don't work. I'll work until I'm ready to not. And so that was the thing that is like, listen to people. I'm not saying don't listen to people, but listen to people, but don't listen to the wrong stuff. And trust yourself. It's like the wrong thing would be, go home. Because he was good. He was good. He was in the field for 30 some odd years. He was good and could go home at 2 o'clock. He was cool, but he wasn't set up like I was. And he didn't know what I wanted. Right. And so if he'd asked me what I wanted, I would have told him.
And he didn't?
No, no, no.
How important is it to lean in to the mentee?
Very. But oh my God, like speaking of, you want to be a better podcast host. Ask questions that matter, because you'll get what you need if you tip off the other person that they actually matter. And how do you make it matter? In a coaching, lean into them a little bit. How can I help is a generic, bland question. Let me know if you need anything. Is a generic, bad question that does nothing. Hey, I see you're coming back every day. What would you like to cover when you're here? What do you do at this point? Would you want me to help go over what you want to go through? Now, you're back here. It's 4 p.m. You're back here. You're standing here. You're going to do something. What are you intending to do, and how can I help you with that? I intend to blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay. Let me help you with that. Or I intend to blah, blah, blah. That's great, but that might be wasting your time. Let me bring you to here, and you could find what you need. I think that's how you lean in. A real good coach, a real good mentee, it's specific to the person. A real good host, a real good guest on a podcast, there's some specificity to the person, because I guarantee you'll get what you need from that person. If you've got a guest on and you want somebody to light up and tell you exactly what you want, make it matter to them. You'll get there. You'll get there. They'll answer anything you want.
What attributes of character
mm-hmm.
of your clients that you've worked with
mm-hmm.
impress you the most?
Vulnerability. I'm really impressed when strong people get vulnerable. I think it just makes them stronger. It's a brave trait to say I'm worried about a meeting. When somebody who typically leads, it's a brave trait. I never see that as a sign of weakness. I see it as a sign of strength. I'd rather talk to that person than some blowhard that is just going to fake power their way through situations. Because somebody who's vulnerable typically wants to learn. Typically, not always, but I'm just saying typically. They want to learn. They want to improve. And when somebody wants to learn and improve, even when they've been in situations a series of times, they can always tighten up. You know, and to me, it's like it's reminding people of their own strengths when they're vulnerable. Reminding people what they've accomplished already, provided you know what they've done. And that's the mark of a great coach, or that you have some clue as to what they've actually done. Remind them of it, and then they can think a little bit differently. So in essence, you get a client and they're like, oh, I haven't thought of that before. Oh, that's cool. I haven't thought of that before. It's the same. It's the same as getting a podcast guest. Be like, oh, nobody asked me that before. That's interesting. Oh, nobody. I think the operative goal in terms of a successful business relationship is getting someone to think differently. Because if they think a little differently, maybe they buy what you're selling. Maybe they include you in on the project. Maybe they become a better podcast guest. Maybe they become a better podcast host. You know what I'm saying? It's like that's really, to me, all you're trying to get to. How do you get somebody to think a little bit differently? And when we are working with people that have thought a lot and have done a lot, I think the operative word is to get them to think one more time. If that makes any sense.
How do we know that we make a difference as advisors, and all of this isn't just mental masturbation?
Well, you know,
like, how do you, how do you track success? And it,
oh my God, that's such a good question. Yeah, and you gotta. So let me go back to
and that's the final question.
That's a damn good one too, brother. So to me, it goes back to when I was talking about early in my career, and it's fun to be a buddy. but you want to do more than that, because buddies don't keep jobs early in my line, right? Results keep and help you progress. It's ultimately always the results. So I believe the metrics, like when I'm coaching clients, and I'm thinking of several specifically in this question, I can think of the client that got the major new job that, without disclosing him, them, or gender, job, whatever, that it was when they got their big new job, it was typically because they prepared. They asked the right questions. Their follow-up was strong, and it's all the things that you talk about. Like that's what you measure. So what is the job, and how much more, and how much, and how do you like it? And so, are they getting the big new job? And I can think of at least 3 situations where that happened. Closing specific deals, especially ones that they're worried about. When you are a good coach, they're telling you the stuff that's worrying them. And then it's debate, well, how did it go? Great, we worked out, blah, blah, blah. You have to track the metrics. And typically, to me, it is this. Are you being heard? Stealing my own cliche. Is your message being received? Are you being ignored when you are moving up the job ladder? Are you being ignored? Are you just sitting there? Are you being utilized? Those are the metrics I track. Are you being utilized to your satisfaction? Is this what you want? Is this the job, career? Like for me, the key in terms of a metric is always knowing what the hell they want in advance. Like just doing your homework. There shouldn't be big, you always get surprises, but ultimately, the fewer surprises, the better the results. Because it's not just you tracking, whether it's as a podcast host, guest, whatever, right? It's them tracking and everyone being aware. I'm going for this job. I'm going for this, new company, new client, new opportunity, new this, new that. Did they get it? Something as simple as that. Did they get it? Did they get it? And are they happy with the result? And to me, that's the mark of a great coach, is you know what the metrics are because you're prepping in advance to achieve them. And if I can help in that in any way at all, again, to help somebody think a little bit differently, so when they're having their next conversation, they're not like feeling frustrated at the end of it. God, I wanted to say this and I didn't. Like today, you know what I mean? It's like if I had a bunch of things I wanted to say and then none of them came out, it would have been like, and I feel like we nailed it. But I'll let you be judge.
If you're listening to this episode and you think it's a loaded pile of, you better leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast. Tell the truth. We're asking for reviews. We need
Always
to grow. Follow John, who's awesome, on all platforms. John Duffin, your message received. And we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.
Thank you, Jay.